You have to do some kind of time. It doesn't have to be mechanical time. Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, there was a time when we didn't have clocks, but you sort of, if you do the same thing in the same oven or stove, after a while, you have some sense of when it's ready. You can
Right.
smell it,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
can go look at it, and you can say, oh, it's got another 5 minutes.
That's
Yeah.
really awesome because the day house oven is
You have to have a reliable oven.
I
So
know.
what?
It's just who knows. It like doesn't
Oh.
close all the way.
Oh.
The heat just like escapes out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How's that renovation coming? We'll talk later.
Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned the dance a little bit. Let's talk about liturgical dance.
Yeah.
Liturgical dance
This kind is okay.
is a controversial thing now, of course, because it's been abused, right, quite a bit in certain times and places of the recent decades. But it has a very important role, actually, in liturgy. We describe God himself as a perichoresis, right, a circle dance, because he's three persons and they're in this interpenetrating harmony and movement. It's a way of poetically describing the inner life of God. And when we do liturgy, we are acting as what we really are, which is images of God. We are images of God. And we are reflections of God. And so even that perichoresis is reflected in the movement of the liturgy. I was glad we had a concelebrant today, because you can see, the more concelebrants you have, in fact, it gets more and more of a dance that you can see happening in the altar. These choreographed kinds of movements that we don't get to do if it's just me. It's kind of nice to be able to do that. And you see that one of the things is the deacon. He's always going out the north door in front of the holy doors and in the south door. And what's that? And he goes behind the holy table, out the north door, in front of the holy doors, in the south door, behind the
Roman and Christian liturgy. I mean, I've seen Eritreans, and Ethiopians, they dance, especially at Easter, and they all dress in special white vestments, and
Well, we have the dance of Isaiah.
they have
The women.
symbols.
Yeah.
Yes.
Their dancing is more like dancing, but we do have dancing. It's called dancing anyway, where some people might just call it a walk, but we walk in a circle 3 times around the tetrapod at baptisms and weddings, and then at ordinations we do it 3 times around the holy table. So there are all of these special moments of circular movement within the church as part of our liturgy. And that's us reflecting God, as I say. There was one thing that came up at least 3 times for me in this chapter that I thought it might be worth talking about, which is translation issues.
What page?
So it's in 3 different places. The first one that I noticed he wasn't directly talking about translation, but it's a translation issue for us on page 30 at the end of the middle paragraph. And it says, we do not see, and he's talking about something that I would call dancing too, like liturgical dancing. We do not cease multiplying signs of the cross and metanies. That's, bows or bows to the ground. Singing, chanting. So there's dance and there's music. And and proclaiming that God is a lover of every human being, and he has in parentheses philanthropos. Okay, this word is something that the translation of it is something that has been a big issue in our particular church. They keep changing it because nobody can agree what the best translation for this word is. And it has to do with, well, what's being said. Currently, our liturgy very often will translate this, lover of us all. Okay. Sometimes you will see it said, you are a good and loving God. Okay. Sometimes you will say it said, lover of humankind, or as Raya has it here, lover of every human being, or you will see lover of mankind. That expression is, right? They don't want, here's the, so, but interestingly, all of these phrases are translating one word. In the original, it's not a group of words, it's not a phrase, it's a word, it's one word. And the word is philanthropos in Greek. So that's interesting.
Clergy or, when we discussed it at clergy meetings or retreats, it was a hot button issue.
Yes. And some of that got politically charged, like it was are we kowtowing to a political culture?
Yeah.
By not using the term mankind. That was the perspective of some people. I'm not a big fan of our current translation, lover of us all, personally, because for the same reason that many people are not a big fan of the expression lover of mankind, is that it can be interpreted in an exclusionary way.
You feel like lover of us all?
Yeah. So who's us?
Yeah, like everybody who's in the church building at the moment.
Right. Lover of us who decided to come to church today, us all here in the building, lover of us white people, lover of us, you could interpret it Ruthenian Byzantine Catholics. You could, obviously they're trying to get around that by the word all, but I think is an important meaty word that's being kind of left out of that. Oh, it could also be interpreted too expansively. You could also interpret it to mean lover of us mammals, lover of us,
living things.
creatures. And not that God does not love all creation, he does. You could say that, but at the same time, it's meaningful. This name, philanthropos, is meaningful. It has a meaning that is worth expressing. I like Raya's, lover of every human being. That's exactly what philanthropos means. That's it. That's a very clear statement of what it means. Could say it's a little wordy, maybe.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately, in English, we don't have some of the distinctions that are in Greek. In Greek, a male human being is andras.
That's right.
Woman is gyneka. And anthropos is all human beings. And
that's right.
A Greek linguist, he explained to me that anthropos ultimately means Hellenes. That's what the Greeks call themselves. So, in a sense, it's this worship, maybe a worshipful creature of God, and what would be one way of looking at it. But mankind, originally, it meant this. Man mean all human beings, not necessarily men.
Right.
It incorporated men, male and female. Women got special regard because woman comes from the word wife. That's where it's not a deformation of the word man. It was folk etymology that led to from vifan, which is the Anglo-Saxon, to woman. Because every type of woman had a different category. There was maids, meaning unmarried women, and then vifan, married women.
Mhm.
So in the 70s,
Have a good,
Are you off?
we're off.
Sbohom.
Go home.
Well,
Have a good Christmas, Father.
Thank you very much. You as well.
nice to see you.
Since I won't see you until then, Christos Rajaytsya.
Slavite Jeho.
happy trails.
Happy trails.
Sbohom means God be with you. Christos Razdayachya means Christ is born. Slavite Jeho means glorify.
Is it not just a possibility to leave some words untranslated? Like we do,
Yes.
Like we do with Theotokos?
Yes.
And just push the congregation to like,
This is that was a thing I proposed at the time when this was a big
just leave it as
controversy. It's just,
philanthropos.
like we're saying Theotokos, why can't we say philanthropos?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's unfortunate English language isn't quite like the Greek in a lot of ways where we can't translate it, right?
I think if you have to sacrifice meaning, which maybe you don't with this word, but if you have to sacrifice the beauty of the word by
Yeah.
making it this really wordy thing for the sake of accuracy,
Which is what you have to do with Theotokos
It
too,
is
like
the
birth
exact
giver of
words.
God.
yeah, you could just leave it.
Well, I'm glad we
Yeah.
keep that one.
The Greek parishes, they refer to their charitable efforts as philotochos.
Uh-huh.
It's acts of love.
Love bearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does Phila mean again?
Philo means to love.
I had a
Or
friend named Philia. That was
Oh.
That's why they call it Philo.
Oh, is it?
Maybe it
Right
is.
to me.
It is to me.
Yeah.
maybe it comes from
That
another
sounds right
word.
to me. I feel a lot of love when I eat it.
Right.
So yeah, I proposed that, but there is a problem with philanthropos that there is not with Theotokos. And that is that philanthropos sounds like an English word, which is very far from the meaning, which is
Right.
philanthropist. A
Mm.
philanthropist is, like a billionaire that gives money to an organ.
Right.
It's like,
Where did
Soros.
that come from? Yeah.
Loaded, it's a loaded.
yeah, unfortunately,
Mhm.
So that was the reason given to me for why they chose not to take that route of leaving it untranslated, because of the kind of the cognate there. Anyway, it's an issue that we have because we have to translate the liturgy, and translating the liturgy as a thing, I will say, is good and important work. We venerate Cyril and Methodius in our church, and that's what they did. They were, the pioneers of that. They took the Greek liturgy and Bible and, worked to translate that into Slavonic, so that, which was because it was vernacular, just like Jerome did with Latin. The reason he translated the Bible into Latin was because people were speaking Latin and he wanted them to be able to read it. Translation is a good and holy work. It needs to be done, and same thing is true now of translating this into English. It's important, but it has challenges, it has challenges. And it's also good to study the original languages, of course. So the next translation issue I found in this text is on page 33, and he himself talks about a translation issue. The whole second paragraph, well, actually the whole page 33, is about whether or not we should use these and thous. Okay. This is remains surprisingly controversial in Byzantine circles. Like, to say there are a lot of Byzantines who pull for this still, that we should use these and thous. Whereas I don't think you see that as much I didn't see it as much in the Roman Catholic world. But it's just, and he gives he's one of the people. He supports the use of these and thous, and he regrets his hand in changing it to, you, when addressing God specifically. And you see that philosophy used in certain translations, like the older versions of the RSV, the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. They use you for most of the text, but whenever it's addressed to God, like speaking to God, like so a lot of times in the Psalms, they start using these and thous, which is interesting to me. What do you guys think about that? Yeah,
Was it not the case that you used to be more formal?
I don't know.
I think I learned that in an English class once, that thee and thou was a very common way of, because that was what the vernacular was in English at the time, thinking of like the King James era, and that you would never like, you would almost never use that for your neighbor or the common folk. That was reserved for God. So that's why that language was so popular among Christians at the time. So it's interesting. This is like the flip, like
Flipped, yeah.
yeah.
It's still used that way in Spanish.
I was gonna say,
You
isn't
have
it,
you have second,
right,
you have the second person plural.
What it does, what the thee and thou do, is they preserve parts of speech or that are lost in contemporary English. Because we don't have a distinction between thee and thou, but Greek does, and so you're preserving that distinction in the text. Would be one reason to do it, but the use of thee and thou is more difficult. It requires attention and care, and the form of verbs requires sometimes a challenge for a tongue twister. But the elegance of it all and the respectability are worth every effort in using them properly. It's almost like, to me, this is almost like an ascetic kind of justification. We're doing it this way because it's hard. Which, I don't know, I kind of see that.
I feel like it's worth noting that thou and thee are specifically singular.
Yeah.
As opposed to using plural or.
Yeah, it's true.
He makes that point too.
Okay.
Yeah, he does. Be plural, which, so then is your prayer becoming polytheistic because you're implying the plural. That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. We came to treat God as the next door neighbor. Hey, you do this, you do that.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but I don't think that's true of everyone.
Right.
There are a lot of people who have a lot of reverence for God, but they still, when they pray, refer to him as you. But that doesn't mean there's no reverence in it.
I agree.
just prayer language.
It has a lot to do with the intention of your heart, right?
Yeah.
And also your culture, what you grew up with. Though interestingly, we do very rigidly and persistently preserve a particular translation of the Our Father, which does maintain these older forms of English. We switch back to it for that one prayer, and we don't budge on that.
I kind of like having different language that reminds you you're in a different place. I also like who, so
Yeah.
Who's legit?
In order not to use he or she.
It's a whole nother ballgame.
That is a whole ball.
But so did
wax.
Chaucer, to be fair. I mean, that goes way back.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any regional dialect where in English they distinguish you and thou in ordinary speech?
Not that I know
To
of.
this day, probably.
Yeah.
Ask a linguist, you'd have to ask a
The
linguist.
Quakers used to do that.
But do they still do it?
I
No,
haven't met
I
any
know some
Quakers.
Quakers.
I know some. They don't talk like that.
That would be interesting.
It would be interesting.
Some place where Elizabethan English has never been let go of, perhaps.
No.
Well, I mean, so if you don't know, there are Orthodox churches where they use strictly Elizabethan English now in the United States. That's what they do, period. For prayer. It's still alive, and Anglican ones too.
Oh, yeah.
So it's still alive in certain parishes.
And then in some parts of Appalachia,
Yeah.
they still use it with English.
Yeah.
That's what they
Well,
started
there's even so among Protestants, you've got strong commitments in some communities to the King James version of the Bible, where
Yes.
they'll
That Jesus
they'll-
wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll only use
If
that.
it
Good
was-
enough for St.
If it
Paul.
was good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for us.
So, but me, I spent all morning taking the these and thous out of the Matins text and replacing it with yous. If you want to know where I stand on this issue,
Yeah.
I do that every week because because we have some the only complete translation of the Manaean, which has the proper texts for every day of the year, is in Elizabethan English. And so there's some prayers that are only available.
Website, and it
Uh-huh.
says, generally speaking, you is more formal and respectful, while thee is used more
Interesting.
informally. Characters use thee when speaking to someone of a lower class or rank.
Like in Shakespeare?
They use you when speaking to someone of a higher rank.
That's
Yeah.
funny. Spanish
Amazing.
is like that because you have tú.
And usted.
Usted means literally means your grace.
Mhm.
It comes from vuestra merced,
Mhm.
and tú, you have to be very careful who you use with. It's
Yeah.
with. I mean, I talked to my father called me tú. I always called him usted. It's a formal, and
Mm-hmm.
you would never speak to a woman you didn't know as tú,
Mm.
or a man as tú. No.
Any man?
Unless you wanted to show great social distance.
Uh,
If you're a cop and you're beating somebody, then he's tú.
oh, okay.
But if you're asking him for something, you would say usted.
Yeah. I took a lot of Spanish, and we always learned usted was for like your elders, but it's deeper than that.
Yeah, it gets really complicated in Latin America, except for Puerto Rico, because they just use tú. And in Spain, it denotes your political affiliation. Because if you use tú, that means you're a communist.
Wow.
Wow.
The common language.
Right,
For the
common man,
people.
you know. And,
Yeah.
and especially use tú with a priest. When most people would refer to him with formal usted. And it's conjugated completely differently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
But more further, you had vosotros, which is the second person plural. But even more anciently, there was vos. And vos was the second person singular very anciently, like around 1000.
It's in Latin too. It's in the old Latin
Right.
Mass. Yeah.
And it's the only place it's still used in Guatemala, Uruguay, and Argentina. And it sounds a little bit like the second person informal, but it's literally like vos mira, and it's considered it's considered informal, but it's among men. Among men you would say vos, because it denotes equality.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, thee and thou. It seems for liturgical purposes, it seems appropriate. I mean, Martin Buber wrote a book about it. I and thou,
Mm-hmm.
to show that great distance. I'm down here, you're up, up there. Or at least the sacredness. Is there such a word as sacrality? I'm translating.
I think so.
Sacralidad. The sacral nature of the.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But it's interesting that it seems to be inverted from what it was originally, though.
Yeah.
That is
Which
to say
matters, because it
that
doesn't mean we can just be purists and go back to saying, well, you is actually more formal,
right.
because it doesn't carry that culturally. But it is interesting to note that that's this.
Right. It matters what it means to those who are using it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody now would think of thee and thou as informal.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite.
Right.
Seems fancy.
Yeah.
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 It's the same. German has a similar type of thing. I know. First German company I worked for, I would talk to these guys using formal, and it was like I got to know them for a while, and so they said duzen, not sitzen, which if you're speaking in the du form, it's your friends, your equals, and I was always speaking more formally until they told me that.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So, of course, these are interesting things for us to discuss in the theoretical, but we also have to obey the bishop. We don't ultimately make the decision on what the translation we're going to use is. We follow their decision. That's the nature of a hierarchical church. But there is one more translation issue that he talked about on the bottom of page 36. The phrase which we render, now and ever and forever, amen. He has it now and always and forever and ever. Okay. But he suggests now and always and from age to age as an alternate translation that he does not like, because he says in God there is no age. God does not live in chronos, he is kairos. And this is exactly what the fathers had in mind using the word aeon. So that's interesting. So literally it's, I don't like from age to age, which he suggests, but there's another way of rendering it that I like better, which is unto the ages of age, releasing it from its chronological implication when he says from age to age. That way of rendering it does to me sound very, chronological. Speaking of, like we talk about eras of history, you've got this Elizabethan era, and then we move on to the next era kind of thing, one after another. And that's not what's being implied here. Definitely not. There are books written about this word aeon, though. I will tell you, the literal translation is age, but there's a lot more being implied there. And so what we use and what he uses is much less literal. But I thought it was neat that he pointed out that while it's a less literal translation in terms of word for word, it actually preserves the musical sound of the phrase. Always and ever and for always and forever and ever and forever and ever has a kind of that kind of has a quality like the aeonos ton aeon. It has a where it repeats the vowel sounds and such, whereas it's a bit clunkier, unto ages of ages is a bit clunkier maybe musically. But I don't know, what do you think? Because the word literally means ages. It does. So we've kind of lost that from it. What do you think?
Well, eons.
Yeah.
Well,
Eons of eons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why do you distinguish that from forever and ever?
Well, and this is exactly Raya's point, but is he quite right? An age or an eon ends.
Right.
The term forever means there is no end. And ages of ages or ages unto ages is saying, okay, the endlessness is implied in that too, because it's one after another, eternally or forever and ever. But it carries the possibility theologically of change. This age is coming to an end, and a new age is coming, where there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and that will be a different age than this age, or a different eon than this eon. And that's kind of lost in the expression forever and ever, where it's just more of this forever. That's not the Christian idea. More of this forever is not the Christian idea. This is an age filled with death and suffering and sin and evil.
when there comes to
And it's coming to an end.
Latin, it's secula seculorum.
Yeah, which preserves the more, as I understand it.
And in Spanish, I don't like the term, it's siglos de los siglos, which is centuries of centuries. It's like,
It's too specific,
Too
way too
specific.
specific.
right,
He's very literal.
Because there's no number.
Right.
Centuries has a number associated with it. There's definitely no idea of a number here, which is important. We know not the
Why, right?
that's right.
because they're probably translating from Latin.
They translate from Latin, not Greek, unfortunately.
Yeah, but if they went back to the source, they would probably render it differently now. It's always good to go back to the source. You know, that's another translation issue. There's a question in our church, our particular church, because our particular church is Slavic in its origins. Therefore, it has been using for centuries a Slavonic liturgy, right? And so there are people who feel very strongly that we should be using a translation into English from Slavonic, which we're not. The current translation that we use for the most part, well, in some places we do, because in some places there are actual differences beyond translational differences, but where the bulk of it is available in the Greek, and they went to the Greek and translated from the Greek. So then that was another controversial decision.
But I'm not a Slav.
Neither am I, but we do
I
have
just,
some Slavs.
I just have, you know, at what point does it become
Yeah,
an American Byzantine church with no reference to
right. Great question.
Russian background? It's cool, that's great, but it's been over more than 150 years, or it's been a while, you know.
And
Not that I'm in favor of, you know, liturgical dances and diaphanous gowns in front of the altar, but at some point,
it's quite a leap. Yeah.
well, I've seen
You've seen it happen.
I've seen
Yeah.
that happen. So,
Yeah.
so at what point does it become full part of the more American
Right.
experience? You know, this country, long before George Washington, had priests all over the place, and places that we don't even, like they found in Natchez, Mississippi, they found evidence that Catholic missionaries were there maybe 100 years before De Soto came.
Wow.
You know, Our Lady of Guadalupe was there in the late 1500s, and it was such a big deal between the church and the conquistadors that the conquistadors put a price on the head of the bishop to kill him, because these are human beings, you know, the Indians, you know, they're not to be enslaved and not to be mistreated, and that was all part of it. So at what point does it become an Eastern Rite become really fully rooted in
Right.
the American? I'm speaking broadly, the American experience.
There is one sense in which we are the most American church in the Catholic Church. And that is that we are the only you know, that the Catholic Church is made up of 23 particular
Right.
churches. And our particular church is the only one in the world whose head is in America. That we are the Church of Pittsburgh. You know, that the head of our church, like the head of the Roman Catholic Church is the Pope, the head of the Byzantine Ruthenian Catholic Church is Metropolitan William Skurla of Pittsburgh.
And it's not somebody in Ukraine.
It's not somebody in Ukraine. Now, the head of the Ukrainian Catholic Church is Patriarch
Right.
Sviatoslav in Ukraine, you know.
Right.
But the head of our church is American. So in that sense, we're more American than the Roman Catholic Church is.
Don't let them hear
Don't
that.
tell them.
uh,
Probably here. Well, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about when Marty was talking is that for example, our church,
Yeah.
I think the non-Slavs outnumber the Slavs, probably.
I don't know. It's an interesting question.
But
Yeah.
there are a lot of, and the newer members of the parish, a lot of them are not Slav. And,
True.
and if you're gonna make room for everybody,
Hmm.
then you gotta make room for everybody.
Yeah.
And you can't just say, well, this is, I don't know how to say this. This is our tradition.
Our people.
Our people thing, which
Nosh.
almost 40 years ago, I heard a bishop at Uniontown say, we need to stop saying that.
Mhm.
We need to stop saying our people. And he talked about in California, they celebrate the Divine Liturgy in Spanish because they had a lot of Hispanic people. Or they had a church where the cantor was of Japanese descent.
Sure.
Or our church, where I'm not a Slav.
Yeah, I'm Irish. So-
My daughter is 1/4 Slav.
Hmm.
Your kids aren't Slavs. So, and it's not that there's anything wrong with being a Slav, but
No.
you got to make room for everyone.
Sure. I do think I will say this. I do believe that we owe a debt of gratitude.
Yeah.
To to the Slavic people who have given us this church. You know that this church is would not be here were it not for them, and they have been an instrument of the Holy Spirit, in my belief, in bringing what was their church into this land and opening it to us as well, making it our church.
But we can go on and on forever.
Yeah.
Well, coming up on Christmas, it reminds me of Archbishop Joseph Doyle's homily in 1970. It's the courage to be ourselves became the title of it. And, he says in there, you were talking about this, I think, in our experience when we were at St. Joseph Byzantine Melkite, Great Catholic Church in Lansing, where, it's like, if we don't get beyond this culture stuff, we're going to be an ethnic ghetto.
Well, I don't think we're an ethnic ghetto.
No,
I think
We're
that
not, no.
that has been
Not this far.
this parish.
no. But no, he was speaking to the Melkites.
Mhm, mhm.
That will be an interesting question to contend with as more Roman Catholic refugees take solace in the Eastern churches.
Mm.
Because I know quite a few Roman Catholics like myself who, for whatever reason, we have all different reasons, have found ourselves here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting because I know quite a few people who have jumped ship, as they say.
If I hadn't become a Byzantine Catholic, I'd be a Greek Orthodox.
Now I've been to some very ethnic Greek
Oh,
Orthodox.
yeah,
parishes.
they're terribly ethnic, but I mean, I would have found one.
Yeah.
I went for a little while, yeah.
How many of us here were born into the Byzantine Catholic Church? Just you?
I was.
Oh, okay.
I'm not Slavic at all.
But you're young enough that doesn't.
You actually speak Russian.
No, I don't. I took a few years in college. So,
A few years?
yeah. But that's like nothing.
Yeah,
It's
well,
Russian.
It's Russian,
It's
yeah.
more
Yeah.
than taking it
Scraping
in
the
high
surface.
I'm
school.
kindergarten level.
She writes.
No,
and
no, no.
reads. Maybe we don't speak as.
Yeah, not as much anymore.
Use it or lose it.
I studied.
Anybody know the reason?
The reason for the season.
So it'll be Christmas, of course, next Sunday.
Are we meeting the week after that?
Yes, even though, because there's so many reasons to not meet.
Is that the first of the year?
It is
Yeah.
New Year's Day.
Why?
Because there was something.
New Year's Day we will meet, and the assignment will be a bit longer. We have to start moving through this book a bit more quickly if we're going to get through it before Lent.
Well, there's another.
So we'll do 2 sections for next time, not next week, but next time. So sections 3 and 4, so through page 88. Okay,
I got some reading to do.
that's actually through 86.
Well, you can watch it online.
Yeah, we may have to watch that.
So I don't know. I think this has been a fruitful. I brought these. Yeah, this is a famous among iconographers. This book, when I was talking about iconography that we still use today, this is kind of interesting.
Who's
Historical.
the ECF of Forna?
He's the guy who wrote it.
Okay.
I don't know a
You
whole
can
lot
look
about
him
it.
up.
You can.
Yeah.
Dionysius was born about 1670 in the village of Forna in central Greece. At 16, he went to Mount Athos, and from the early years of the who wrote the book
His name
on-
looked familiar.
on iconography.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, there's Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite is a very well-known theologian from the 5th century. 5th century? Or 6th?
What's his real name?
No one knows. It might be Dionysius, actually.
You can look him up.
You could. You could look him up. He's my favorite theologian.
Oh,
Really?
Yes. So, but a lot of people are named for him.
Dionysius.
No, I'm saying Dionysius of Forna is probably named for Dionysius of the Areopagite.
Oh, the Areopagite.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, that's cool.
Keep thinking of when we lived in Greece and we walked by an Orthodox church. And I saw these people sitting out and all of a sudden they'd all stand up, they're smoking and then they'd sit back down. I never knew what it was, but they had a speaker outside the church and everybody's talking and then when they hear the consecration, they're smoking, everybody stands up. And it's over and they sit back down. It took me forever to understand what
Where was that?
happening
In Athens.
in Greece.
Catholics? You're talking
happens-
about the
no,
Catholic? No.
Greek
Orthodox.
Orthodox.
Oh.
Well, it happens in the United States too.
I've never
About-
seen it
About
here.
30 years ago, we went to Mary's brothers on Christmas Day, and I had a really bad allergic reaction to their cat. They live across the street from the Chaldean Cathedral in Southfield. I walked over there. Mass hadn't ended, and there's people in the vestibule smoking.
When you gotta have one, you gotta have.
Yeah.
That
And talking
means
and
during the liturgy.
chit chat.
But there's
Then
no-
they can wait.
Father, they don't post any times, and it's just whatever the priest starts.
This
you
is
know,
how he
and
wants
you
to
don't-
cut
That's what I want to do. That's what I was saying I want
But
to
you
do.
gotta have speakers outside so we
You gotta
can
have
also.
speakers. You gotta have speakers.
You all have to move into the neighborhood so you can
Dude,
hear
if the
the
day
sound.
house has to then also know the time of the sunrise and sunset in order to get someplace on time,
Have to
we
bring
will all
my-
just not show up anywhere anymore.
I have to bring my liturgical cigars.
is there such a thing as a liturgical cigar?
No.
There will be.
There is
Yes.
such thing as a liturgical comb, however.
Ask Father Thomas
A
Loya and
liturgical
Father Deacon
comb?
Gregory Loya. They have liturgical cigars.
Yes,
For-
sir.
For your beard?
Well, it's used on the hair and the beard. You have to understand, I am not traditional here. If I were traditional, I would have long
Right,
hair.
long hair.
And we wear the hats, right?
Right.
And so when you put the hat on and take it off at certain times, it musses it up. So
Right.
the comb is there to,
Is it made out of anything special?
they're fancy,
Oh,
Really?
they're
I was
fancy.
gonna say, is
Yeah.
it like sheep's bone or something?
Probably. I don't know.
Or cow horn.
I love
Although interestingly, there is one custom which is not really followed so much in the contemporary church, but there's an old custom that you would not have anything dead in the altar. That there could be no dead animal parts in the altar, no leather, and because we've to draw a clear separation between the unbloody sacrifice and the previous sacrifice of animals. That there's
Oh,
So it
And
has
that-
to be wood.
it could be wood or
Yeah.
these days I suppose it could be plastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, or silver or whatever. But
Yeah.
it couldn't. Nothing could be made out of
what
animal.
about leather shoes?
No. Now nowadays everybody does it anyway.
Right.
But I'm telling you, this was an old thing. I, however, follow it, and I have cloth shoes
That's
No way.
that I partly got for that purpose, because I just love that. I love that tradition, and in fact, we don't bless. So again, some priests don't follow this either, but you're not to bless the Easter baskets in church. They're not allowed in the church because there's dead animals in there.
Right, that-
And we don't allow dead animals in the church because it's the
Or
association.
food, any kind of food.
Yeah. Well, the Eucharist.
The
And
Eucharist, but not, I mean,
s-
like.
other
like-
holy foods
like
too, like
soda pop and
no,
sausages.
no. But there are other foods too,
Like the
like we
fruit.
bless bread, wheat, wine, and oil, which are not non-Eucharistic foods even, and we bless fruit on
In August.
But non-animals.
on Transfiguration, but not animals exactly. The animals have to be blessed
A lot.
outside or in the
Oh.
hall or because no animal sacrifice anymore.
In the Byzantine church, are there relics in the altar?
So we have something called an antimencion, which is a cloth, and antimencion means like on the table or against the table, or and it's a cloth that you lay on the holy table, and the relics are sewn into that.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
but there are
wow.
relics present in the.
There are, yeah.
And that changes every time the bishop changes, right?
Well,
No.
Is that true? It
didn't-
doesn't.
We're still using ones that were consecrated by Bishop John.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
typically you're.
Typically, you're right,
You're
but
right.
okay.
We know whose relics they are.
I don't know who's
Talking
relics they
about
are,
your story of
but I
Greece.
can feel them in there.
I remember
You
hearing
can?
a talk or
Wow.
reading Metropolitan Callisto swear. He said one of the first times he was in Greece. So these Greeks, he thought they were praying the Jesus prayer in cafes and stuff. They're
Oh, yeah.
drinking ouzo. They got these worry beads. He thought, gee, these people are really spiritual. They're praying the Jesus prayer while drinking ouzo.
Yeah, Comboloi.
The-
Yeah, Comboloi, as they're called. They're always playing with it.
How come you don't know what relics? You're not
Nobody
supposed-
told me.
You're not supposed to know, or it's just, no one's told you?
I don't know. I'd like to know,
Okay.
but I
just
don't.
curious. Okay.
They didn't tell me. But it's interesting. In the old days, I don't think they have this requirement anymore, but in the Roman Catholic Church, they had a priest, if he was traveling, like, for example, if he was a military chaplain and there was a war going on, and so he would be celebrating Mass for people on the front, they would have to carry around a stone, an altar stone, they would have a small one for the purpose of travel, but that would have the relics in it.
Wow.
But an accommodation that was given to them was that they could use the Byzantine antimencion
Oh.
instead, because it's
It's
portable.
lighter.
It's
Yeah.
just a cloth
Cloth.
that you can then spread on. It's like an instant holy table because it
Sanctified,
has
whatever it touches.
Well, it
Yeah.
has relics sewn into it.
it does,
Yeah.
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 And you know why we celebrate on relics?
No.
So in the early church, the Christians were being martyred,
Oh.
they were being persecuted, and they would, of course, we believe in the resurrection, it's why we venerate relics in general. But so the Christians would go into the catacombs, partly to hide, from the persecutors, but also to venerate the relics of the martyrs. And they would use the tombs of the martyrs
As like
as the holy table, as the altar. And so that became
Wow.
regarded as essential to the liturgy itself. And so now you have to always have a relic to celebrate the Divine Liturgy. the Eucharist.
Wow.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if only 2 out of 8 people here were born Byzantine Catholic, does that mean that a fourth of the people in the parish were born into it, or is it higher?
I think it's probably much higher.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's an interesting observation you're making, because these are the people who have decided to participate in an extracurricular, if you will. and a lot of times this is phenomenon, just a psychological phenomenon among human beings in general. People who have chosen something will tend to have a more fervor about it a lot of times.
True.
So converts and
the zeal
people,
of the convert.
Yeah.
the zeal of the convert,
Yeah.
people. So you're going to see in who comes to church on Sunday is going to be a much higher percentage of those are born and raised Byzantine Catholic versus who participates in something like this. that's just psychology. Yeah.
I've heard that like 80% of Antiochian Orthodox priests are converts. Is that correct?
I have no idea.
I mean,
They
That's
do have a large
because,
amount. Yeah.
that's
They do have
because
many.
the Antiochians took in
The evangelical
the evangelical
Orthodox.
Mhm.
which is a whole other story. But there were people,
Oh, yeah.
there were a
There's a
bunch of
whole
people who were part of Campus Crusade, so they
Well,
were Protestants, and they
Some
went
of them were
looking
Campus
for
Crusade.
the true church,
I'm,
and they started, they realized it was the Orthodox Church, and at some point, Metropolitan Philip took them in, and
Yes.
that's why. There's a lot of
Yeah.
Antiochian Orthodox who
I
are
do
not.
know a couple of
I
Antiochian
took a guy,
priests who
I met a guy from that group. He was an aide to, remember Jesse Helms?
Yeah.
Senator Jesse Helms, he was a top aide to Jesse Helms, and he came to Athens, and he got word from there that he was to look me up
Wow.
because I'm Catholic, and I showed him around Athens, but he was part of that group. He'd been- you know, his father had been a preacher, and his grandfather a
Yeah.
preacher.
Yeah.
He came in.
And they went way beyond Campus Crusade because there were people went to Oral Roberts University that became part of this Wheaton
Yeah.
College and just all
But,
kinds
yeah,
of
but it
stuff.
started with people.
No, I know that, and I know that
Anyway,
was
so
the
they
main
started
person
as
behind it.
Protestants, and that's why.
When movements have the word crusade in it, I'm like,
I knew the son of the founder,
Yeah.
yeah.
Dr. Bright's son, Brad Bright. He did stay in business. Thank you, Father.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you so much, Father.
Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
So to answer your question, the renovations are going well.
Good, yes.
All the
Glad to hear.
drywall is hung, all the mudding is done, the floors are installed.
Wow.
It's a matter of now just priming, painting, and installing our